Professor Lenore, from your experiences then, what strategies can institutions and mentors use to address gender disparities in research opportunities?
How hard it is to shift gender norms, hard to make those changes in countries where there hasn't been sustained activism by women. But the reality is that it is women rather than men who have to get up early in the morning in order to get breakfast, in order to make the children's lunch before they go to the laboratory. Men do less domestic work. If someone wants to be mentored, much more likely to be women than men. We have to be really tough about this and to keep pushing up against it.
TropmedTalk.
Hello, and welcome back to the TDR Global Asia Podcast, Bridging Generations in Research. I'm your host, Rima, an early career researcher and TDR Global member. In our last episode, we discussed the importance of collaboration in global health research with Professor Lenore Manderson. Today, we will explore a critical issue that affects researchers worldwide, gender equity in research. I am thrilled to again have Professor Lenore Manderson here once again to share her thoughts and experiences on this topic. So, Professor Lenore, let's start by addressing the challenges. What are some common obstacles faced by women and underrepresented groups in research?
I think it falls into two areas, right? One is who are the researchers, and that does include both women and other people from underrepresented groups, and we can discuss that. But the other issue is who they're studying, and that has been a very slow process to remedy, because even in the late 1980s, TDR target diseases largely described the health problems of those diseases as the research described them as affecting men. So it was only when the Social and Economic Research Committee began to question that in 1989 that we began to even support research on women and then discover some very important differences. Now, the question is whether having women as researchers might have moved that along rather more quickly, or whether involving women is and people from other groups is a question of equity which mightn't shift the research questions in the process. Mm-hmm. And I guess I think that it's both, that we need women to be researchers for reasons of equity, as we need equity in any other area of research. But also we need to be asking, why does gender matter in terms of research, and why do other unrepresented groups matter also? And I think in that context, again, we've paid far too little attention to who is affected by diseases, even for TDR, even though we know that the prevalence of disease tracks inequality, and it is always the poorest of the poor who are most affected by those diseases.
I see. So, but Professor Lenore, how do these challenges impact career advancement for women in research, and what specific barrier exists in the grant writing and funding process, to be explicit from your perspective, Professor?
Well, TDR started to address the need for women to be involved as active researchers and to address career advancement and simply their presence on committees and so on from the 1990s. And that's still a major program. So, there is still someone working on gender in TDR and other people who are concerned about gender issues across the WHO family of committees and programs. There are multiple problems that highlights. The first is that everywhere women are less likely to do science, technology, and engineering and medicine type studies and mathematics than they are to do humanities or to do practical programs, training that best suit their assumed roles as mothers. So women are more likely to train as nurses than doctors, and more likely to be practicing doctors than to be research doctors, and so on. In countries where gender roles are deeply entrenched, though I'm right now struggling to think of a country where that's not the case, but in countries where gender is deeply entrenched, then women often have enormous difficulty, one, making a decision and getting the appropriate support to study in areas that will open the doors for them to be working in disease-specific areas where men dominate. They are more likely to be actively discouraged, not only by members of the community, but by their own families and by their male colleagues. So we need continually to be mindful of the challenges that women face in order to ensure that the best people for the job are doing the research, and that those people are mindful themselves about why gender matters.
I see. Yeah. Totally agree with that statement. These barriers can be discouraging, but they also highlight the need for systematic change. No, Professor Lenore, from your experiences, then, what strategies can institutions and mentors use to address gender disparities in research opportunities?
I'd probably have given you a much clearer answer a few months ago, but I think that the kind of things that are happening in the world today highlight how hard it is to shift gender norms. I was first involved as an activist in gender in 1972, and I cannot believe how things keep getting undone globally, including in the global north. And if that's the case, then it's enormously hard to make those changes in countries where there hasn't been sustained activism by women and there aren't laws and regulations in place. Even where they are in place, that does not undo social values. So South Africa, for example, has an incredibly good constitution which provides for equality across all dimensions, all kinds of identities. But the reality is that it is women rather than men who have to get up early in the morning in order to get breakfast, in order to make the children's lunch, to take the children to school before they go to the laboratory, and then go shopping at lunchtime, and then go home and clean and cook before they get around to the work that they need to catch up on. So, and men just don't do as much work. Everywhere in the world, men do less domestic work and support people less. And that includes the support work that happens even in a workplace. So if someone's having a hard time, or if someone wants to be mentored, the people who put their hands up are much more likely to be women than men. So women do care work at home, care work at the workplace, care work with friends. Often they're also caring for aging parents or parents-in-law. And men get up and go to work and write papers and privilege their own careers. So, I mean, we have to be really tough about this and to keep, pushing up against it and risk people getting irritated with us as a result, because being nice just doesn't change those kinds of inequalities. And I mean, I know very well how much care work women do both in richer countries like Australia and America, but especially in poorer countries where there's far less activism and where there are much stronger stated cultural norms about who gets to do all of that kind of work. But I also think that there's, a lot of insidious discouragement of women, and very little facilitation. So if there's a conference overseas, men are more likely to apply and to be selected and to be able to go. Women stay at home because someone's got to take the kids to school, and their mother or mother-in-law isn't free. So it's like at every possible area, including the kinds of things we talked about in relation to mentoring, women have a harder time.
Yeah. It's true. Especially, I think we need to, familiarize that domestic issue. It's not only for women. No, Professor Lenore, I mean, it's for everyone to do the chores. Is it something like that then?
Yes, but I guess my point is that we've been saying that actively for 50 plus years, and I truly thought we won that little thing, at least in some countries. And then you see how things are changing at present, and sort of people are taking backward steps and restating, no, it's women's role, etc. It's not women's role to peel potatoes. I mean, you actually don't need to be a woman to know how to use a kitchen knife or peel a potato, and you don't have to be really well paid before you're prepared to do that. So, and ditto with children and so on. So, but the other thing, of course, is that a lot of women end up as single parent households, but also maybe doing other kinds of care work, as I said. And I've just been doing some research on who cares for older people in South Africa. And it will not surprise you that most of the care work is done by women, and that women often are caring for the little children and parents at the same time. Men help. They don't do the work, but they help. But when men help, they really emphasize how much work they've done. So women tend to underestimate the work they do, and men expect some kind of reward for helping lift a person off a bed and into a chair, So I think you add that, and then you add all the effective labor that goes with that, of comforting people and reassuring them and so on. And that really does interfere. But to go back to my earlier point, I do think it's also really significant that women are still lagging behind in terms of what kind of training they have, and women's willingness to see themselves as serious researchers and to work in technical areas, so that it doesn't seem to be so hard to encourage women, for example, to do medicine, because being a doctor is not that different from any other care work that women do. But to go to train as a doctor and then decide that you want to be an immunologist or a virologist or so on is a very different step, and there isn't sufficient encouragement. And there is a challenge there, I think, because we will find people more willing to mentor women, but also people from other disadvantaged communities in areas where there are lots of women. As I said, women will volunteer to care. But what we want are men in male-dominated subfields of tropical disease research and any other research to make it their mission to promote good women. And that's much harder.
Yeah, that's much harder. Well, anyway, Professor Lenore, you mentioned about the TDR's effort on the equality as well. So let's looking ahead. What opportunities exist for promoting gender equity in research?
I mean, it's just an ongoing thing, right? But I just think we can't give up. We just have to keep on saying that. But the other thing you'd mentioned earlier, other minorities, and I do want to come back to that, because I think that increasingly people are worrying about the relationship of researchers to research communities and the coloniality of that relationship, that researchers come in and act with authority and don't engage with communities properly and certainly don't listen to those communities. And there is, I think, a strong argument that more researchers from target communities, people where those diseases are prevalent, will give people a greater sensitivity to those issues, and it's easier to engage if you speak the same language, for example. Now, again, someone from a remote community with a high level of endemic diseases is less likely to finish school, is less likely to have a computer, is less likely to have access to data, and is more likely to not be very confident. So there does also need to be a lot more effort to bring in minority people. If you think about where TDRs dominate, tropical diseases dominate rather, in Southeast Asia, a lot of the areas where there is still unresolved problems of infectious disease are in remote areas in our countries, where people are poor and are poorly connected and are often discriminated against. So if you are a hill tribe, for example, or if you live in a remote area, in a remote island, then you're much less likely to have people in your community who've been picked up and have gone through university and who are interested in your diseases. So I think we need to be thinking all the time, who do we exclude, not necessarily intentionally, but who do we neglect because we don't even see them? And that really does mean that we look at where diseases are prevalent and think through, how do we better engage with communities, and why don't we have people from those communities involved in research, whether they're trained or whether they have the potential for training downstream. And so there is an argument there for active recruitment, but also active engagement with target communities.
All right. So you just mentioned several advices that we could take for the opportunities for promoting gender equity in research. But to wrap up today's session, Professor Lenore, for our early career researchers, especially women just like me, tuning in today, in short, what advice, your best advice, probably you also use that advice for yourself, would you give to overcome gender-related challenges and seize the opportunities available?
Either you don't marry or you have a really, really good partner who's going to help you and fill and backfill for you so you're not stuck with the work, number one. Not everyone's got that choice. I think mentoring is important there. And because you want someone who takes you seriously. And as we were saying before, one of the challenges for women and for people from minorities is that they're so used to feeling unworthy, apologizing for themselves, agreeing to do the work like wash the dishes up rather than be part of a grants discussion, that they just constantly get excluded. So finding a mentor is important in that respect. You know, if you can't find a decent partner, then finding a mentor instead's a good option. And I think to take real advantages of the opportunities as they emerge. And that includes both career development options, and women and people from other minorities right now do have an advantage because a lot of the funding agencies are targeting people from particular minorities. So if you fill a minority, you're a small step ahead. And it doesn't mean that you're any less worthy, but it is an important correction to the fact that you and your friends have been so excluded for so long. So, you know, I think that that's important. And I think one needs to make that case in other kinds of research grants, you know, that where, for example, if you apply for American funding, you're asked to explain whether you have equal numbers of men and women. So already there is an awareness there that equity is important for the National Institutes of Health grants I'm talking about. Now, if your research is about something where you don't have equal numbers, then you have to explain it. And I think that the advantage there is that if you want to do something specifically on women and correct that, then there's your opportunity to say, research to date has focused on men, and it is critical that we turn our attention to women to better understand whatever it is you want to understand. So I think we do have to be really proactive in supporting that and encouraging people to look for opportunities.
Yeah. I see. It's very, very important to get the support both from partner and also from the mentor, right? Professor Lenore, mentor here. I get the impression that mentor is very crucial for this part. Is it correct, Professor Lenore?
Yes, but I think well, I don't think it's yes, is it crucial or not? It's certainly important, and I think though that I don't want to give a message which says if you don't have a mentor, give up. I mean, I think some people simply need to be tenacious and look for the opportunities and grab them, mentor or not, and become a mentor themselves downstream. It's not as if there's a queue of people saying, oh, I'll mentor women. So, I mean, we have to create our own opportunities also. And I think in that context, that whilst the kind of mentoring we were talking about before is important, or senior people guiding people, peer group support is really important. And 4 or 5 or just 2 people with the same problems who can talk out those problems will encourage each other. And 4 of my PhDs have just set up an inter-country support group. They're all in different countries, and they've just decided that they needed to get together once a month to talk out these kinds of issues, and that would help them move forward. So rather than looking around thinking, well, there's no one I want to be mentored by, or there's no one available, I mean, you really do have to think, okay, who do I want to talk to about this research? Who's interesting and who faces the same problems? Different research, it doesn't matter what the research is, people share the same difficulties, and it helps to have someone to talk those issues out with.
Yeah, since you will have more insights from a different point of views, right, Professor Litter, so you can address, you can find the answers among those sharing problems shared. All right, Professor Lenore, it is very, very nice and such an honor to meet you virtually. I can't wait to have the opportunity to meet you in person. So thank you again for this inspiring discussions that we have. Gender equity is essential, not just for fairness, but also for the progress of science as a whole. To our listeners, if you're facing challenges, just like Professor Lenore said, remember that you're not alone. Seek out supportive mentors, even peer group support, and advocate yourself, and do not hesitate to push for change. This wraps up our 3rd episode. Stay tuned on our social medias for more exciting topics to be discussed. You can follow our X or Twitter at TDR Global Asia. And this podcast is brought to you by the TDR Global Asia in collaborating with Center for Tropical Medicine, Universitas Gadjah Mada. Until then, stay empowered and keep breaking barriers. My name is Rima. I'm signing out. See ya.